Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Priyam Mishra. I'm a periodontist, gum specialist. So moving on, we are calling our next chairperson, who is Dr. Sadashiv Rao, Managing Director of Yalamanchi Hospitals and Research Center Private Limited. And we have Dr. Purvi Chawla, MBBS, Mumbai. Kindly come on stage. Sir, you can read it from here. So we need to felicitate also. So you can introduce.
Good morning, and I thank the organizers, especially Bansi, Sabu, and our President Vasant, and also other members of the organizing committee for inviting me to chair this wonderful session of honoring Dr. Jargar. He is a very good friend of mine, and we have been associated well back ever since the Diabetes India was incorporated. And we have been in the executive committee all the way. So Zargar does not need any introduction in any part of India. He is a great son of India. He is a director of Sherry Kashmir Institute of Medical Sciences, Srinagar, Kashmir, chairman Department of Endocrinology, same institute at Srinagar, and is a member Institute of Body, AIMS, New Delhi, member of the Medical Council of India, past president Endocrine Society of India, editor-in-chief Indian Journal of Endocrinology, and his publications are many, and he has more than 200 national and international journals. And so I welcome Dr. A.H. Jargar onto the dais. So I request Dr. Bansi and S.R. Arvind.
Good morning, dear friends. We just heard a very intense talk by my close friend, Professor Tripathi. And if he succeeded in doing one thing, that at this age made me feel a little bit uneducated. How much still needs to be known and how much still needs to be understood. Today, in the next 20 minutes, I'll be talking about, most of it will be my perception of how diabetes is evolving in young and what is likely to happen and what you and me are going to see in years and decades to come. And many of these are my own perceptions, and you have a right to agree or disagree with them. For a long time, if you look into the space of type 2 diabetes mellitus, young onset that age has been debated for a long time. Because when I became an endocrinologist, most of the diabetes would occur in late 40s. People would retire from their positions at 54, and average life expectancy was 56 to 58, right? So there was hardly any time to get sick for those small number of people who used to develop diabetes. And in fact, we hardly would ever discuss it, even in our postdoctoral program at PGI. Now, what do you call it? Normally, by nomenclature, anything that happens at 18 or below is pediatric. So by definition, an early onset diabetes has been named in 19, but less than 40, and some people have also said it's less than 45. Now, why is this class different? Why do we need to talk about it? Type 2 diabetes is type 2 diabetes, and we look at the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes, we look at the epidemiology of it, and we look at the complication profile. But how is it different? One of the most important things is that, yes, not only the globe, but we in India are also experiencing significant obesity, which was not seen here. There is a parallel of underweight as well as obesity going on here. So overweight and obesity are taking us over, predominantly the younger age group. You see, like when I went to the school in northern Kashmir, everybody, rich and small, would walk to the school, which was around 5 kilometers away. When my children grew up, we were in the institute campus, and at the door of the campus, the vehicle would come, and children one day revolted. Why doesn't that car wala move around and pick us up from the doors? And I mean it. And that's the sort of psyche that is developing in human beings. And that's what is going to wreck generations. Low socioeconomic status. This data came from the Western world. From 1960s, in fact, precisely from 1966, first time Western world became aware that they have a problem with obesity, they have a problem with lipids, and they have a problem with coronary artery disease. And because NHANES of 60s had shown it, and then they started a cholesterol education program in 1966, which later became ATP1, ATP2, ATP3. Lot many people learned from those lessons in the Western world we are talking about, but not the people of the low socioeconomic group, because you needed education, and proper food needs money, and getting a bite on the street in the Western was cheaper and easier. Getting that double McDonald's was cheaper, just bump through and get. So that's why Hispanics in the United States, Asian Americans, Afro-Americans far worse than in the Caucasians. They have learned a bit of a lesson in the last half a century, which we need to emulate. Ethnicity we have been talking about all along. I will not get into that. Asians, that's why even the BMI at which the metabolic syndrome takes off is lower than what it is in the Western world. Family history, history of diabetes. And now when I became an endocrinologist, we would see a polycystic ovarian syndrome once in a while. And when I became a professor of endocrinology, we would see a few cases of gestation diabetes in a week. Today, in small little private practice, there are 10 guys who are calling me every second day. Their daughter has a problem, their daughter-in-law has a problem, either with polycystic ovarian syndrome or with gestation diabetes. And that is something, and more importantly, that has become now extremely important. We all get programmed. We get programmed by circumstances. We get programmed by the principles. We get programmed by the family. We get programmed by where we are born. And it's amazing that we start that programming in utero. And if your metabolic milieu is not appropriate, all those deleterious changes will be initiated there. which my elite friend talked about just a minute or two back. Now, this is a data that there's a global group which is known as Non-Communicable Diseases Collaboration Group. We have been a part of it for more than a decade, and we have been tentatively looking at how this globe has been behaving in different areas in terms of obesity, in terms of coronary artery disease, hypertension, polycystic ovarian syndrome, diabetes. And this is that looked at the body mass index, how world is behaving. And this is a paper that got published in Lancet in May 2016. Now look at it. If you look, this is obesity in men, and you look on your left side. If you would look, listen to me for 10 seconds. If you look at a country in terms of an absolute number of obese people, we were a populous country in 1975 as well, not only today, in comparison to other countries. We stood at position number 19. In term, see, if you take current Ukraine, even as a small nation, Germany, a smallish nation, it had more obese individuals than we had, obese men. Now look at it today. We have the 5th most obese male population in the world today. So in absolute terms, the number of obese people in the country has actually increased, and it comes at some cost. Now look at it. If that was the situation for males, look at the women. In 1975, women were at position number 19 with men joining hands. And in 2014, they are doing even better than us or worse than us. We have the highest number of obese women in our country today after China and the United States. And that's why Dasaf and Rakesh, we are saying that epidemic of that polycystic ovarian syndrome, that GDM, it starts right there. That metabolic milieu starts right from the early age of life. And that is not something to be proud of. Now, that year only, when this data was getting collated, we looked at the trends of diabetes globally, everywhere, and how it has been behaving. Tangible data was available from 1980 till 2014. Again came in Lancet that year only. Now if you look at it, in India, in 1980, when many of us became physicians, when started developing names, the parties are right? Yes. We had 11.8 million diabetics. Today, a small nation like Pakistan has 11 million, which is like half a province of UP. I don't know exactly what is the population of that, but cannot be bigger than UP. 11 million. But look at us, 64.5 million. And that was in 2014, because the last cutoff for data submission was 2014. By the beginning of 2019, we were 77 million, right? And today we have already crossed 80 million. Now here is a big catch. Is this only that so many times numbers have increased? No, it's not. Now this disease is striking younger. You saw the figures of obesity. And when I'm talking about diabetes of 1980, the exposure to hyperglycemia to a body was for a relatively short period of time, because there would be other 90% of mortality in India used to be attributable to infections, including diabetics, right? And now we managed to live longer, and diabetes managed to come early. The same diabetes that would come in 40s and average life expectancy being mid-50s or late 50s. A lot would not happen because of diabetes for a decade. Now the same diabetes comes in 20s and 30s, and this guy expects to live till 80s. Now it's not only the number has increased, the duration for which this fellow's body would be exposed to hyperglycemia is huge. The person who would require diabetes, who developed a diabetes at 50, at 60, Now a 28 fellow would require an intense therapy at 38, 42, and expectedly for another 4 decades, another half a century. And that is what is happening in a very big way. And you can look at this. Lower the body mass index, later the type 2 diabetes. As BMI increases, type 2 diabetes keeps on coming early. And this is what is happening. Tangible published data. When we were very popular endocrinologists already, 48 would happen. 1.5 decades decrease from that till middle of this decade. And it's fast coming down. And that's where we are catching it. The huge population now congregating there. It is not just a matter of numbers, not those big corporate guys in Bangalore and Bombay who drop dead on the street because they have a metabolic syndrome right from 18, 20, intense students, intense workers at 21, 23, 24, and death at 26 and 30 or 35. And that's what it is. And it's steeply coming down every year, every decade, and that's where we are. This some data were published a decade back that prevalence of obesity and overweight in Kashmir in relatively youngish people, 20, 40. We had seen that it had started taking off. It was already much bigger than what we were seeing in people who were 40 and above. We had published a paper in JAPI in 2000 where we showed that 7% of adult Kashmiris in 2001, obviously it was a late 90s data, had obesity. And for women, it was 23%. And now it reflects is a national character. Whatever the reasons, we have some of our own postulations. And this trend starts right from there. This data was published from the group by Lancet right on the day world was celebrating obesity. Because this was a huge data on, imagine a data on 128 million children, adolescents. In different parts of the globe, obesity is increasing in children and adolescents and young adults 10 to 50 fold. So you can imagine when they keep on growing, right from 5, 10, 20, 18, going to the schools, although a little bit chubby abdomens, it's not good. And what is more stunning, this is the most stunning, you see, Nature by convention does not publish epidemiology papers. This is one paper they decided to publish from this non-communism. Now it is not, if you look at the global trend, firstly we are seeing this so-called, which in our younger days we used to call Coca-Colaization, McDonaldization in urban areas going to someone. Now today, the rural areas are driving this global obesity now for times to come. All these bad habits, you see, at least some segments in urban areas are now trying to go to the gym, have a better food, more educated class, more approachable to clinicians like Sharma Saab and Arvind Saab. So they get counseling in there, but not in the urban areas. And imagine when this sweeps through India in the rural areas, what would happen? And you know the care that these guys are going to get. And that's why it's extremely important to look at this. This is the latest one, another data on 65 million people. Unrelenting path. And that's what is happening. Now that is one story. Let me stop here for a fraction. So on the one hand, this obesity is worsening. And whatever obesity can do, I will not go to the molecular biology. We are sufficiently saturated with molecular biology for the day. I would not do injustice to my psyche or to my colleague. But look at another aspect. It's very important. Please pay attention for another 3 minutes. Now this is a data that came in Diabetes Care. Pama Indians and the true Indians. The Asian Indians, the us. There was a study known as GARD study, and that was a study that was conducted looking at the epidemiology of dysglycemia in 3 major cities of subcontinent, Chennai, New Delhi and Karachi, by Emory University. And this is what they found out, that by the time any one of us in these 3 metropolitan cities is 55, we have some form of a dysglycemia, right? And in our younger days, we always used to talk about Pama Indians, how they got quickly exposed to the Caucasian food, the Western food, the North European lifestyle, Western European lifestyle. But what is important is look at obesity profile for them. Their waist circumference 108. Our that profile when we have problems 83 only. So there is a genetic component also intrinsically. And look at it. Glucose profile 2 hours plasma glucose high. It means if you look at the community studies, you will find more often impaired glucose tolerance, which would be a surrogate marker of insulin resistance. If you look at us, higher mean fasting plasma glucose, more impaired fasting glycemia, which will be a surrogate marker of decreased insulin capacity, beta cell dysfunction, lower beta cell activity. Nearly 2/3 of prediabetes in Pama Indians is IGT, and more than 2/3 of prediabetes is IFG in us. And this is the first paper that I published that was ever published anywhere, but people hardly read it. Impaired fasting glucose at impaired glucose tolerance, lack of agreement between the two categories in a North Indian population. Way back in 2001, the very first time when somebody compared IFG and IGT, that time I said there's something wrong here. But obviously, unless someone beats the drum somewhere, nobody listens. And this is 6 years later in a different population. We replicated it consciously. Look at IFG 40 to 49, 18.9%, and IGT 2.9% only. And lower down, the same thing. Now, what is happening? Now, in a population where we are living, that early obesity is putting an additional pressure on those beta cells, which somehow have a tendency to cave in early. Right? And when these dual things happen, now normally what will happen, if we wanted our beta cells to live longer, because we know our that metabolic profile starts getting disturbed with a BMI 23 only, not 25, not 27, not 28. We needed to get stuck up at 21 to 22. And once you start get fattening up, more and more pressure on those cells. And that's where, you know, on the one hand, this generalized adiposity, central adiposity, a big chunk of it living in the liver has its own consequences, which I would not get into, the ectopic fat everywhere, and then severe beta cell dysfunction leading to insulin deficiency. I think this is some area where we need to look in our population. In younger population, you know, always there will be diagnostic challenges, there will be therapeutic challenges. I would not get into that. Like, you know, if you look at a young person like this and comes to your own clinic, many times there would be a confusion about when you see a blood pressure high, what is it? Type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, maturity onset diabetes of the young, FCPD. Now, there are ways and means of doing it. I do not want to mess up with the time, and there are ways and means of doing it. And today, most of the places in the country are well equipped to make an appropriate diagnosis. But that this type 2 diabetes is emerging in a very big way. And in this summary, you know, so family history positive, present in 3 generations, yes, look at monogenic diabetes. No, look at early onset type 2 diabetes. 3 generations, I mean, not that no one. If family history is negative, ketonuria is there, C-peptide is low, type 1 diabetes. No ketonuria, C-peptide poor but not absent, look at FCPD, some form of a malnutrition-related diabetes mellitus, and many other things is that. Therapeutic challenges, you know, again, this is something that I want to, see, many times now we talk about the cardiac protection, we talk about the renal protection, and most of the data available is in much elder people from the Western world. Now we need to look at the safety of many of those drugs and trial data in younger people, right from that 18 years onwards, because their cardiovascular and renal health is at stake. Coronary artery disease, according to the national data we have been part of, has doubled up from 2000 and 2015 in our country. In our own lifetime, we have seen chronic glomerulonephritis, chronic pyelonephritis, polycystic disease of the kidney, where the end stage, we did not know of IgA nephropathy, sir, for a long time. And now today, everywhere, it is diabetic kidney disease, 60 to 65%. And that's where, we need to, and starts very early, and particularly in these younger population. And understandably, given that age, given that juvenile, youngish, vagabondish behavior, more revolting behavior, management becomes a little bit difficult. So complication profile, huge number of data has shown, is much worse. Because, after a decade or decade and a half, a fellow whose diabetes comes in at 30 is just 45. And if the same diabetes was at 65, the same complication would be at probably not even at 85, because this fellow managed to live well for 65 years. So probably has already many habits which are sanitized and can understand the consequence of taking care of his health rather than a guy at the age of 35. And that's another problem that again tells us about huge data available that, I don't know, all of you must have remembered, there was a study known as Today. Half a dozen papers were published from this study in Diabetes Care about half a decade back. And there was a press conference given by the Diabetes Care editor on that day. And if I remember one sentence from that, and that was this: these youngsters in early 30s, when they should have been looking for dates, when they should have been looking for fun in life, when they should have been looking for jobs, they are looking for endocrinologists, nephrologists, and cardiologists, and it is a shame. And it is worsening, and we are doing damn little about it. Again, tells us about the same complications. I would not go through that. Diabetes-related distress. Yesterday I met, when I was traveling to this place, situation chief of this SpiceJet, he was very keen that I should get some prior. I didn't know the guy. And ultimately, this young man comes and says he's also a diabetic. I said, are you taking something? Haan sir, mera blood sugar 300 tha. Now I was taking one metformin 850. Now I understood 500 only, because now it is 147 only. So when did you do it? He said 2 months back. The fellow is a high earning guy, hardly must have been 42, 43. I said, it will be a shame for me if I accept any courtesy from you, because I am going for a diabetes meet where I are going to talk against people like you and doctors who treat you. 850 pe ise asse bahut, he was taking too much of it. He has himself, and he thinks job is done. So what brilliantly Arvind told us, I'm saying, like those 3-minute consultations, where do we go? I'm like, this fellow, how long will he continue to be chief of that SpiceJet? Huh? And that's where, poor acceptance of we have a problem. You see, at 60, you will have a better acceptance. Aap to buzurg ban rahe hain, to ho sakta hai. Ab 35 pe, it's very difficult to make him believe that yes, it can happen anytime, and it's happening. We have been seeing it. And that diabetes-related distress, many of us, you see, in my younger days outside, I've written on cards for a decade, poor understanding, hostile behavior, ununderstanding family. Did it solve any problems? No. It only proved an agitated Dr. Abdul Hamid Zargar, who could not handle this crowd. It took me a decade to humanize myself. Whether they improved or not, I don't know, but I improved in my behavior. And that's what is the distress. And somebody who retires at 60, 65, life is slated. 10-20 bhi honge, kitna chalega? It's okay. But when you're in the middle of the profession and economic issues, losing a day's job, getting tests done, losing a day's job, is for us, Arvind tabulate is for us very simple to tabulate. Going to a psychiatrist, going to a psychologist, going to a nephrologist, it means a day, it means that agitated state, and it also means losing a day's work, and many people lose their job. And how many people will tolerate, how many of people in the corporate sector or any sector would tolerate such an employee today? What concession they'll get? None. So they will invariably hide it. One day, one brigadier came to my clinic and he said, he has to become Major General, but he should not be diabetic. I said, are you? He said, yes. He said, how can you become no diabetic? He said, no, I cannot become, so what do I do? I said, if a person can become president of a country, because I knew many of them, prime minister of this nation, I knew whole cabinet for 3 decades in Kashmir, half of them having diabetes, and they can run the nation. And such dichotomies exist there. And that's why, there are different problems for these youngsters. There are ample recommendations, global recommendations, WHO recommendations. But then the point is, how often we are aware of those recommendations and how often we have those, even about gestational diabetes I was referring to, Professor Seshaya took 3 decades so that we would accept on a definition and convince the government of India that we are not hoaxes, we are doing it on scientific grounds, it should be nationally done. You can talk to him later on. Sexual dysfunction, marital discord, many times people would not talk about it in a younger age, but with older people they come out too. Tripathi and me, they talk about it, and I'm sure Dasab also is a privy to many of these clandestine discussions which younger clinicians wouldn't be yet. And that leads to a lot of familial discomfort, disruption. You need a reason to rupture a family today. You just hardly, people are on the edge, and I'm saying, like, if you don't realize it, then you are not in tune with the current times. And then I wouldn't get into pregnancy and pre-gestation diabetes, and it's a huge thing, and then it will become a much bigger challenge. On the one hand, marriage is occurring later. You want to do an MD, a PhD. Tripathi Sir would not give him a PhD for another 10 years. He's not satisfied with connectin, cytokine D, A, B, C, D, Z, because X he has missed. And in the process, goes to 35, bloated abdomen, and gets married, and now GDM is not there. It was already there. It was a pre-gestation diabetes which was never diagnosed, never accepted. And it's going to be a huge hassle. I'm sure that I was talking to local medical college guys last week to the gynae department about some of the data we have on gestation diabetes. I almost felt like quizzing all those professors and consultants that how many actually would look for it, even today, in spite of the noise that I have been making for 4 decades, sir. I think I only went hoarse, so I have to carry a glass of water everywhere with me because of this yelling, but very few people accepted that. And now, in conclusion, I would say yes, making an appropriate diagnosis. In spite of all these diseases, all these problems, the bottom line, people will live longer, but the quality of life might be disturbed. Because better treatments are available, better options are available, more professionals are available. Whatever we say today, I'm saying like, our president gave a relatively dismal outlook of how we are doing things. But imagine a day when the premier institutions of this country refuse to start a degree in endocrinology and diabetes. They say it's not worth it. When I went for my DM, I was thrown out of the institution. Lent insulin, plain insulin writing, he goes 2 years to PGI. I was terminated from his services. And there was not some small-time local guy who was the director. Dr. B.K. Anand was a former Dean of All Institute of Medical Sciences, whom Sheikh Abdullah had got to be the director. She said, "Oh, you will be a cardiologist, you are a good boy." I was also a boy someday, young man. She's a good boy. So why are you going there, wasting their time? And that time, there will be one seat for a competition in this whole nation. And today I'm so happy. Last time I went for conducting DM exams at Sher-e-Kashmir Institute of Medical Sciences, Srinagar. One boy from Coimbatore got DM, one boy from Chennai, and one girl from Delhi. And I was giving a talk 2 days back in Srinagar. There were 5-6 DM guys. One was from Andhra Pradesh. I was so happy. And one again was from Chennai. And when we started DM, the first boy who made it was from Bihar. Dr. Saab ki both abhi bhi train mein Bihar se patient aate hain. So early aggressive management, not like this station chief of this thing, 850 milligrams of metformin did the job, he reduced. That first contact and what sort of a programming you do to him will determine the quality of this fellow's life. You don't have to chase an illusion, but you have to give a realistic assessment to him and also tell him about the complications in a very subtle way without terrifying, and also looking at the psychological components, because it's a very fragile age. And youngsters are under tremendous pressure to deliver, and deliver on many scores. And we know the impact on reproductive life. That will be a discussion for a debate someday, maybe next year's some oration or talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor H. Sargar Saab. While emphasizing vehemently on the rising epidemic of obesity in the younger adults, you have given us tons of food for thought on this emerging crisis, feeding further into the rising epidemic of diabetes. So you have indeed inspired our troop of physicians here to get ready for the combat of diabetes in the young. So because this is an oration, we will not be taking any questions. But since this is a public health interest topic as well, and one of huge concern, we request you to give us a 30 to 45 second bite on your message for the young adults today to prevent diabetes.
I think, one of the most important things is that for everybody in general, for youngsters in particular, health needs to be a priority. And many times, we prioritize. You see, I'll give a simple example. If somebody's kid is going for a 10th class examination or 12th class, whole family is on the tenterhooks for a year. But nobody ever talks about this kid's health down the line, even on that particular day. So we need to do all those things. That this fellow needs to be a brilliant one. We need to be proud of that kid. Nation needs to be proud of him. But he needs to be healthy. He needs to live a good life. He needs to be free of all these diseases which would plague him for the rest of his life. His being a brilliant in any profession would deliver. But if he's a sick man, deliverance would be braked in between. It would be speed breakers repeatedly. So one important thing is we need to take care of our health. We need to watch our weight. Once in a while binging is okay. But what is allowed once in a while? As many times we allow during the month of Ramadan, and low below people come after 3 months, those habits continue to be there. खजूर दो खा सकते हो, उसने खजूर खाने ही शुरू कर दिए. So that sort of a habit needs to be curtailed. Binge eating once in a while, you cannot curtail youngsters. You cannot put very hard and fast rules. But it's fine, you go off the line once in a month, once in a fortnight. But this aberration should be realized as an aberration. It should not be realized as a normality. And the sooner we correct it, the better. Because otherwise, looking at the genes we have in this part of the world, and this epidemic of obesity, we cannot handle. Our body cannot handle. And whatever manpower we create. Arvind, when I first attended a meeting of RSDI, in a cubicle of All Institute of Medical Sciences, we were 8 or 9 people in a room in New Delhi, All Institute of Medical Sciences. And today I feel so gratified that sometimes 8,000-10,000 people are interested in this. And still, how far away we are from being where we need to be. Because this demand is escalating so fast that we are not able to keep pace with it. We're not able to. So that's why, that demand needs to be curtailed at the grassroots level. And that's why, you see now, every time you go and watch television any day, they will not talk about the pizza. They'll say now for the same amount of pizza, same amount of money, you'll get double the pizza. I remember an oration on obesity by a German professor in New Delhi. Is Dr. Makar here? I don't know how many of, and I had a talk after him, and he said, this was his opening remark, conflict of interest. I said, I do not know whether I am qualified to give a talk on how to prevent obesity, because once I was leaving from here, my children have an off day on Saturday and Sunday. And he said their McDonald's in the school, they said on weekends they are 50% off, and my children first went to get that 50% off, that Big Mac. And he said that if I could not impose that clean habit on my children, I don't know what to tell people in India. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for that wonderful oration.
And that's one thing I have never shied away from. You'll be amazed to know that, after pursuing with the former government, we created a policy then in 2012. I was a part of healthcare planning in 2012. Slated then 1,600 crores for taking care of diabetes and coronary. That's how that national screening program set in. And when the current government took up the powers, I was called to Delhi one day in Institute of Medical Sciences. I said, the current government also, I said, this money and this scheme is not a politician's scheme. It is not a bureaucrat's scheme. It's a technocrat's vision of India and the healthcare providers. So this should not be fiddled with. So we make a word wherever we can. Whether it makes a difference or not, we don't know. But whenever we get an opportunity, we make a word. Shashank knows it where we raise the voices, from bottom till top.
Thank you so much, sir. The show must go on, and we hand over the mic back to the organizers.